Okay, now in this video we're actually going to create our first SubD object. I'm going to talk to you about a SubD, what it is, and how to get it going here in SoftyMod XSI. Okay, so let's create our first SubD object. To create an object, let's go over here to the Get menu, and let's go to Primitive. Now if we look through this menu, you'll notice that you won't see SubD anywhere. Why is that? Well, SubDs are here. It's just a little bit less conventional the way we come about getting a SubD. You see, to have a SubD in XSI, you have to create one from a polygon mesh. So let's go over here to Polygon Mesh and let's create a cube. Okay, I'm going to hover over this top right viewport B over here. I'm going to hit F12 on the keyboard to maximize the view, and you should have this cube in your scene. Now this cube is a polygon cube, it's not a SubD. So how in the world do we get a SubD? Well, a subdivision surface is nothing more than a smooth out surface that's derived off of a low-res object such as this cube. And this cube is a low-res object because it only has 6 sides. As you can see, it's a very primitive squarish object. So what we need to do is create a SubD from this object and create a smooth out version. First thing I'm going to do is come up here to my shading options, right here where it says wireframe, and I'm going to switch to shaded view so I can see the actual cube instead of just the wireframe. I'm also going to hit G on the keyboard to hide the grid. I don't need to see it right now. It's kind of just getting in the way. So what I have to do is create this object into a SubD, or basically create a SubD off of this object. So to do that, I'm going to go here to my main toolbar. I'm going to go to Create. And right here under Polymesh, which is short for Polygon Mesh, I'm going to look for this little button here that says Subdivision. The short for Subdivision is SubD. So when we click on that, a PPG opens up. I'm going to pin it down by clicking on this little keyhole icon so it doesn't go anywhere. And if I move over, I see I still have this cube in my scene. And if I select it, there's my cube. But according to this PPG and to what I just did over here in this menu item, it should have created... We're going to edit that part out of the video, and we're going to pick up and start here again in 3, 2, 1. So where is our SubD object that we just supposedly created? Well, it's here in our scene, it's just we can't see it. And the reason for that is because it's stuck inside of this cube right now. See, if I go over here to my shading options and switch back to wireframe, there's our SubD. You can see it. It's sitting right there inside of our cube. Basically what the SubD is a smoothed out version of the cube. Think of it this way. Imagine a cube is a big old clump of a cube-shaped piece of clay you got at an art store. Well, it's a cube for the moment. Let's say you open it from the wrapper and you start rolling it around on your hands. Eventually it's going to smooth out and go from being a cube to something that looks more like a small little ball or a sphere. That's essentially what this SubD object in here is, and if we select it we can see it. It looks kind of clunky, it's very pointed, has some jagged edges, but that's because it's a low-res SubD right now. We can change that, however, very easily. But before we go any further, we need to be able to set this up visually so we can see this better. So I'm going to switch back to shaded view, and in order to be able to see the SubD better, I'm going to hide the cube, and that's very easy to do. It's a good thing that I pinned down this PPG when I did, because I'm going to be using it quite a bit right now. If I go over here under inputs, there's this hide/unhide button. What this does, it toggles the visibility of that cube on and off. So what I want to do is toggle the visibility off so that I can see my SubD cube here. Now I know I called it a cube and it looks more like a sphere or a lumpy clay sphere, but don't worry about that. It's actually the cube. It's a smooth out version of the cube. Okay, so let's take this SubD and let's smooth it out even further. Right here in the subdivision, you'll see this parameters that says level. And right now it's set to a default level of 1. Well, the lower the level, the lower resolution the object's going to be. The lower resolution just means it's going to be very lumpy, very low res, very pointy and jaggedy. That's not what we want. The whole purpose of SubDs is to get a very high res smooth object that's derived off of a low res object such as our cube. So let's go ahead and grab this slider and increase it. As soon as we go up to level 2, you can see that we have a lot more polygons now in this object, and it's a higher resolution object. So it's a lot rounder. It's still a little bit pointy, but it's a lot rounder than it was before. So let's increase that slider to 3. And now we can see that it's very smooth. Although it's not as smooth as it can be. If we increase this to level 4, now we have a pretty smooth sphere. And if I deselect by clicking out here and dragging an empty space, we can actually see in our viewport it's pretty smooth. Doesn't look anything like the cube that we started off with. It went from being a cube to being this little clay ball or whatever. Okay, let's look at a few other things. Down here under the subdivision rule, we can change the algorithm that SofDMod XSI uses to calculate this sub D based off of the rough cube. So the default is Catmull-Clark, and that's probably going to be the most common option that you're going to be using. It's the one that I like to use. It's my favorite, and I use it all the time when I'm modeling using sub Ds inside of SofDMod XSI. You can switch to 3 other algorithms, however, like XSI do Sabin. Now XSI do Sabin smooths the object out very heavily, but it tries to keep the shape of the low-res object a little bit better than Catmull-Clark. Now this could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing depending on what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to achieve a shape that's closer to the cube, such as this, well then you just achieved your objective. If not, then well, this probably isn't the algorithm that you want to use. Now I personally never use this algorithm. I like to use my regular Catmull-Clark sub Ds as opposed to XSI do Sabin. Of course, you can choose to use whatever you want. Neither one is right or wrong. They're just different. So if we switch over here to linear, what we get is pretty much a linear subdivision. What that means is that we get no smoothing whatsoever. It's pretty much the same cube as before. The only difference is it's been subdivided 4 times, which makes it very high res, but it keeps the exact shape of the original cube. So pretty much this isn't something that you're going to want to be using when working with sub Ds. The purpose of sub Ds, of course, is to get a nice smooth organic surface based off of a rough low-res cage, or cube in this case. So let's switch over here to do Sabin. It says obsolete in parentheses. And this is just like the XSI do Sabin with one key difference. What you'll notice when we switch between the two is that the obsolete version pretty much takes the same shape as the XSI do Sabin, with the exception that it doesn't add as many polygons or as much resolution as the XSI do Sabin. We can see here the wireframe is very dense. There's lots of little squares everywhere. Those are polygons, by the way. And with the obsolete version, we get a lot less of that. Now, during the course of this tutorial, we're going to be using only Catmull-Clark. So you can use the others and experiment with the others if you want, but we're only going to be using Catmull-Clark for the purposes of this tutorial. That's what I personally use all the time, and honestly I don't know any artists who use anything other than Catmull-Clark inside of XSI, although sometimes I guess in special circumstances you might want to go ahead and switch to one of these, although I've never run into that circumstance myself. Okay, down here we have some transfer properties. We have a transfer button for materials, UVs, weight maps, that sort of thing, and another transfer button that's more associated for animations such as envelope weights, shape animation, that sort of thing. What this means is that I can transfer materials and things from my low-res cage to my sub D. Let me show you how that works. I'm going to click on the unhide button up here to bring back our cube. One important thing to note about how these sub Ds work is that the sub D object underneath inside this cube can take its material information from the low-res cube on the outside. So let me show you a practical example so that it actually makes sense, because right now your mind's probably spinning and you're going, and what in the world are you talking about, Jack? You're nuts. Okay, I'm a little crazy, but I'll show you how this makes sense in a moment. Let's go ahead and select the cube. I'm going to go over here to where it says Get. Then I'm going to go to Material, and I'm going to click on Lambert right here, and this PPG is going to open up. What I want to do is over here where the settings are for diffuse, there's a little wrench icon over here. Click on it to open up a sub-menu, and let's go ahead and click on Checkerboard. Now let me close that, and let me switch over here to a shaded view. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a render region right here. I'm going to hold down Q on the keyboard, and I'm going to left click and drag a square around my cube. And when it renders out, you're going to see this texture that pops up. Now it's not projected correctly, but that doesn't matter. This isn't a texturing tutorial, so it really doesn't matter at the moment. Let's not waste time with that. What you can see is that the cube has some kind of a texture on it as opposed to the gray shader that it had before. Now, if I click on hide over here and hide the cube, and this refreshes, you'll notice that the sphere underneath, which is the SubD cube, doesn't inherit the material. Well, that's because we didn't tell it to. That's what this transfer button over here is for. If I click on that, what ends up happening is that the SubD object is going to inherit whatever material the low-res control cage has. In this case, the low-res control cage is the cube. So there you go. If the cube had a texture of concrete or of rocks or grass or dirt, well, hitting this button here is going to transfer that data to the SubD, and then the SubD is going to inherit that material. Now, this button over here transfers another type of data, not material data, but animation data, such as envelope weights. Now, I'm not going to talk about what envelope weights are because this isn't an animation tutorial, so we'll save that for some other tutorial where we go ahead and animate a character or something. But for now, this shows you what this transfer materials button does. Then we have an edit transfer button, which opens up a window where you have a little bit more control, and you get a little bit more detailed controls as to what kind of data you want to transfer from the cube to the SubD. But we're not going to get into that now because it's not important. So I'm going to get rid of this render region here by holding down Q on the keyboard and left clicking an empty space. That gets rid of the render region window here. And here's our SubD. Okay, so that pretty much covers how to create a SubD object real quick in XSI, and what some of these important parameters here in the SubD PPG window mean and what they do. So I'm going to end this video here, and we'll pick up on the next video where I left off.